Hello and welcome to the Durham Talents channel. My name is Jesse Durham. I teach people how to live and leave a lasting legacy with infinite banking. Today, I am very honored, very excited to have a good friend and a mentor of mentors with me for an interview on the channel, Bruce Wehner. I hope that you enjoy. All right, Bruce, I never would have thought it, right, when I came across you and your channel, The Money Advantage, and your messaging around infinite banking, that I would ever have a channel where I was reaching people about infinite banking. Number one, I never would have thought that. Number two, that we would be talking together here with each other. So let me ask you how you are this morning, but then I'd actually like to give a bit of an introduction for you. Normally I ask, guests to introduce themselves, but I know some things about you. I would like the opportunity to edify you myself, but how are you today?
I'm really good. And just to make you feel a little better, I never thought anybody would listen to me on the Money Advantage podcast. So we're in the same boat, the imposter syndrome, as people say, and I have it every single day. That's what drives me to learn more and more and more and get better and better and better.
I love that. And I love that about you. And I sincerely mean it, of course, when I said that you're a mentor of mentors. So Bruce has a background in education, which we connect on. I'm a former Spanish teacher in North Carolina. He has an education background, and that teacher in him comes out in everything that he's done. So he is a husband. He is a mentor in our space. He's been a professional in our space for a long time. Personally knew our Nelson Nash himself. He is a big integral part of the NNI, the Nelson Nash Institute. He's just a wealth of knowledge and has been a good friend. I have been part of a IBC mastermind group that he hosts for over a year now. So getting to spend time with him really has been an honor and a pleasure. And again, I'm really happy to have you on here. But anything else that you would like people to know then about who you are and where you come from? And then if you would, Bruce, just give whatever background, okay? And how you found IBC or IBC found you, or because you have a traditional background in finance. So let me kick it over to you. You tell us.
Yeah, well, I used to joke around with Nelson that I was doing IBC before it was cool, because my father actually took out a policy on me when I was born in 1963, and he handed it to me in 1986 when I got married, and said to me, "Hey, there's a lot of cash value in here that you can borrow against, and you could use it for a down payment on a house." And so Nelson, he was inspired in the early 80s when interest rates rose, but he really didn't start writing his book and formulating his ideas until the middle to late 90s, and then wrote his book and released it in the early 2000s. So, I did find the formal IBC, but I was utilizing whole life insurance cash value for longer than I care to admit now. And people often wonder why I got out of education and got into the financial space. I was always had the entrepreneurial bug since I was a freshman in high school. Um, I joked, and I've relayed this story many times. I'm going to try to give the Reader's Digest version because I have such a diverse background. But in approximately 1977, a coworker of mine, I started working when I was 13 years old at a Chevrolet dealership. And I started learning about how cars work. My dad had a service station, a Shell service station. And I saw, and a lot of your listeners are probably younger and they don't remember this, but we had an oil embargo from the Middle East. And it really hurt the United States as far as our energy ability to obtain energy, because we were so reliant on the Middle East. And my father's actually his Shell service station failed in the around 70. I don't remember. I was such a young kid then. It was around 74, 75, somewhere in there. And so put a lot of stress, financial stress on the family. And so I started working at age 13 And I started getting a lot of money, Jesse. I mean, it was, I know you're going to laugh right now, but when you're a 13-year-old and you're working between 20 hours a week as when you're going to school, and then you're working 40 hours a week in the summertime, even at $1.25 in the 70s, that was a lot of money. And so I started putting it in the banks and not really investing, but I was putting in the banks and seeing the compounding of the interest. And I always had walk around money, but my dad instilled the fact that, you need to save money. And what happened after that was one of my co-workers who was a senior and I was a freshman. He said, I grew up in a really small town, about 4,500 people, right on the Mississippi River, and it had a lot of creek tributaries that came out. And I know people are going to be a little shocked about this because of PETA, but back in the 70s, fur coats were like really, really popular. And so he said, "Hey, can we go trapping in these creeks on your father or grandfather's farmland?" I said, "I'll ask him." My grandfather said, "Sure." And so we started trapping raccoon and muskrat on the tributaries of the Mississippi River. And in 1977, 78, I don't remember the exact years, but we could get $50 to $75 for a raccoon pelt. And I mean, talk about being in high cotton, and we just split it 50-50. And we would go before school. I mean, can you imagine kids nowadays? We would get up at 5 a.m. We would walk the creeks and the traps and get them, clean them, and then get off to school by the time 8 o'clock was there.
No, from the moment you said something about working at age 13, I'm like, no, most people do not know what that is.
Yeah. And so then I went to college and I played Division II football. I was actually going to be a dentist. I loved science. I love working with my hands, and I got this bug that I was going to actually coach. And I did 1 year of college coaching and I didn't like how the recruiting is. It's everybody's kind of lying the entire time, the coaches and the players, because the coaches want you unless somebody better than you says yes, and the players say yes to you unless somebody better than your school says yes. It didn't fit me, my integrity. It did not fit me at all. And I'm not trying to be self-righteous, but it just didn't fit me. And so I decided that I was going to use my biology degree that I was going to use for dentistry, and I was going to just become a high school coach and teach. And I did that, and lo and behold, within about a year to 18 months, Franklin Life comes calling and finds teachers and coaches. They wanted to spread their message of the lucky 3%. And the lucky 3% is only 3% of the people in the United States were retiring without stress, um, because they had not, or they had actually saved enough money and they weren't worried about their money going down the stock market. Because at this time, still, stock market in the middle 80s had really not become a central figure because the 401k only came around in 1979 and it still wasn't widespread in the acumen of corporations. So a lot of people were still using whole life insurance at that time, um, as a main savings vehicle for retirement. And when I did that for a couple of years, but everything that I was involved in, I was coaching every day of the year. I was teaching biology. I was setting up lab sessions. I was working my way as an advisor to assistant principal. And at age 26, I had what I thought was a heart attack at at a basketball halftime of a basketball game I was coaching, and it really wasn't a heart attack. It was actually an arrhythmia caused by too much caffeine. It was the only way that I was staying awake throughout the day. And so I had to step back from that, and I just continued my educational career. And then in 2001, I got recruited by a headhunter to start a Catholic school in Rancho Santa Fe, California. That's a long story. I won't bore your listeners with, but it did not go well. And I'm not going to explain why it didn't go well because it's very complicated. But that got me back into entrepreneurship when I bought an automobile repair place because I knew that from my father and being in the business. So I did that for a while, and then my wife's mother died, so we moved back to St. Louis. The original group that I was working with in the 80s with the whole life insurance had prospered, and they asked me to come back into the group. And so I said, okay, I'm going to stay in this entrepreneurial thing, and um, started in 2007. In 2008, guess what? The financial crisis, the mortgage crisis happened. Luckily, we were doing mostly whole life insurance and fixed income, so our clients were they felt great. But we decided we were going to figure out how and what happened in the financial crisis. And Carlos Lara and Bob Murphy, I believe a lot of your listeners might be familiar with them because of the Nelson Nash Institute. They were both the original board members on the Nelson Nash Institute. They held, before they were with the Nelson Nash Institute, they held something called a Night of Clarity in Nashville, Tennessee. And myself and Mark Benson, another practitioner, attended this. We sat in the first row, and we finally found out what fractional reserve banking is. And we were just fascinated. Carlos had explained it in great detail that now we had another reason that whole life insurance is a way to protect your family and actually help society out, because we could reduce fractional reserve banking, which is a way to inflate the money supply. And the money supply inflation is causing inflation for the American people and the debt and all this other things. And so their grand idea was they were going to try to take over the banking function, which would help individuals, but it would also help society by stopping inflating the money supply. So from there, we attended the think tank that very year. And then I've only missed one think tank since. For whatever reason, Carlos, Bob, and Nelson Nash and David Stearns took a liking to us, and they actually we worked on the practitioners program and how we were going to mentor people and so on and so forth. And then, of course, around 2013, the practitioners program came about, and so I became authorized practitioner. And then just a couple of years ago, David asked me if I would become one of the council members on the newly formed board because Nelson had passed away in 2019, and I did consider Nelson to be a a great mentor of mine. We would joke all the time. He would give me the little tidbits that he did. And Jesse, I've said this to you on many occasions, and I'm going to tell to your listeners. Nelson had a unique way of letting people find the truth themselves. And I'm not really good at that. Um, I try to get good at that by just asking questions that build curiosity. But the teacher appears when the student is ready. And unfortunately, too many people that I run into, and I bet you run into them also, have said things like, man, I wish I would have started this 20 years ago. And I always say what Nelson used to always say is, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, but the second best time to plant a tree is today. So let's plant the tree. And then, out of necessity, the Nelson Nash Institute started taking off. David Stearns had asked me to be a mentor many, many times. And I was, frankly, just being honest, I was getting overwhelmed with the mentorship program. I had way too many mentees. I felt like I was doing them a disservice. So it popped into my head one day, hey, I love teamwork environment. Why don't I just start this mastermind and I can get all my mentees together, other practitioners together. We can do collaborative learning. We can do sharing. We can inspire people, and frankly, we can help each other with our uh, psychological issues by being by ourselves. And that's when we started this a couple years ago, and then I came across your channel and I was really impressed by the way that you communicate Nelson's ideas, and reached out and we connected, and I invited you into the mastermind, and that was approximately what, about 14 minutes of me rambling again, like I'm really good at doing.
I'm soaking it up, and I would both like to, in the same breath, say that you're very rigorously diligent about cultivating a particular IBC mastermind. I know that it's not open invite, um, but in the same breath, I would like to say, for me, from my perspective, because that didn't happen right away. What happened was you reaching out to me just to find out more about who I was and why I was saying what I was, and just to get to know me, which I really appreciated. Even though I, of course, didn't know what that conversation was going to look like, but you were so encouraging, you were so curious. It was a great conversation from the start. Of course, I was thrilled just to have time to be sharing a screen with you, because we were having a Zoom call, and I got to meet Becca on that call, another good friend, been on the channel multiple times, doing great things. But then it did lead to being invited into your mastermind group. So that's my way of saying thank you. It's been a big deal for me. I've always appreciated, from being in business and entrepreneurship when I got out of teaching, cultivated groups. I've actually always had something going on in every business that I've been in since, cultivated leadership groups. And it's always been a great joy for me to receive from those groups, contribute where I feel like I can contribute. And it's been a great thing. It was a humbling thing for me, still is, but I've met so many great people because of it. So, I'm saying thank you. I'm saying I'm very grateful. And I certainly feel the obligation to joyfully, contribute there as best I can, and learn at the same time. I love the collaboration. I love the feel of that. So let me ask, I appreciate you laying out the whole history. I want to ask you about Nelson. I want to ask you about your own experience. So if you would, maybe block off again prior to that first night of clarity where you get to meet, Bob, Carlos, prior to the think tank, meeting Nelson. So prior to that, did you end up using a policy for a down payment on a home, or anything else? What all did you use policies before you had this codified filter of IBC?
Yeah, so good. That's a good question. So I did skip a little bit about that. So yeah, the my wife and I know people are going to we bought a 1,200 square foot ranch home, brand new ranch home, um, and it was $74,500 in 1986. And FHA had a program of 3.5% down, and it almost was exactly the amount that we needed. We had something, I don't remember exactly, and I know I probably quoted this different amounts, but it was right around 34, 35, $3,600 of cash value that I had accumulated over those 24 years that my dad had diligently put that premium in for me. So we borrowed against that. Then we lived our professional lives. I went off with Franklin Life and bought a couple more policies, one on my wife, one on myself, and we started putting even more of our money into that. We were contributing to the traditional 403Bs for me as an educator, a private school educator, and my wife was contributing to 401Ks. But we were also pouring money into two more whole life insurance policies. And the reason I tell you that is, um, we then, when I moved to California to start the school, there's a big difference in cost of living from St. Louis, Missouri, and San Diego, California. So even though we had sold our home and we had a decent down payment, we went from a approximately $300,000 home in St. Louis to a $618,000 home in San Diego, and our salaries did not increase that much, so we had to have a substantial down payment. Now I hadn't I hadn't jumped on board with the Nelson Nash Institute yet about not using banks, and we hadn't got enough cash value anyway. We couldn't have purchased that home of $618,000 outright at that time. I mean, Jesse, you know, from an educational salary, I mean, it wasn't like we were making tons of money. Um, and so I did that. We've purchased cars over the years with it. My wife and I don't buy a lot of cars. I'm not trying to do a value judgment here, but we buy cars and we drive them forever. And I tell people, I'm not saying, but I got clients that actually buy or just lease cars, and Nelson rolls over in his grave every time because he thought leasing cars were the stupidest thing in the world. Um, but people have this idea they want the shiny new object. I'm driving a 2010 Lexus right now with 145,000 miles on it. And when people say something to me, um, I just tell them I don't like driving my money. I'd rather do something else with my money.
I'm gonna write that line down.
Yeah. And then what, I've done a ton as Nelson has pointed out in the introduction, is that infinite banking is about controlling the banking process or function. And it's not about investments of any kind, but you have to put your money, unfortunately, in the banking system somewhere, and you can use it for financing, but it could also be a holding place that you can use to hold your money until you use it for investments. And so I've used it for a multitude of investments also. Traditionally, real estate. Some non-traditional things that I've done is some private lending. And the most recent one is I actually contributed to buying a teak saw in Panama, South America, and invested into a teak saw to process teak in South America. We don't have time to get in why I did that, but it was really nice. I came across the opportunity. My wife and I have diligently saved into whole life insurance over the years. And so we were able within 3 days to have $100,000 to put into this investment. And I just got an update a couple of days ago, and it's going really, really well. And we'll use that to pay back. We've also used it for oil and natural gas partnerships. And we use the income off the oil and natural gas partnerships to actually pay back our loans. And then we just rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. So that's how I and my wife have used our policies over the years.
Very cool. Very cool. I could talk and ask about different things there. I've been to South America, and the types of wood that they have there, beautiful, the smell, the look. So that's interesting about the teak wood. Well, then, okay, so thanks for filling in that gap. Very insightful. Because it's so many different ways of what you've used your policies for. All right, so go to that pinpoint then where you're a fan of whole life, personally, professionally. You're helping people get whole life. You've used whole life insurance. What epiphanies, what flashpoints, what aha moments did you experience meeting Carlos, meeting Bob, meeting Nelson, Think Tank, Fractional Reserve Banking, just anything more there, anything that you worked through, anything that struck you as, brand new paradigm shift, anything like that?
Yeah, thank you. So my father is going to be turning 86 next month. If he walked into this podcast right now, he looked like he was about 65. No, he has not retired, and that was one of the things that Nelson has championed over the years, is that retirement is should not be in anybody's vocabulary. And he said that if you look up retirement in the dictionary, that it says to take out of service. And he says, why would anybody want to be taken out of service? And he also thought it was bad for society. You have people that actually are at the prime of their knowledge, the prime of their ability to solve problems from all their wisdom and experience, and yet we take them out of society. I mean, it's it's kind of really silly when you think about it. And it was because of our socialist type of views that were employed. Oh, by the way, this is really weird, Jesse. I don't know if you know this, but this today is the 90th anniversary of signing the Social Security Act into a bill.
Okay, I didn't.
Nelson hated that. Matter of fact, Nelson tried not to actually take Social Security, but they wouldn't let him. They said, "Well, we're sending you the checks anyway." So because he thinks that that caused our society to actually rely on government, and he thought that was going to be the downfall. And we could talk about that at maybe some other time, but
Well, it does. I'll jump in real quick and say it does. It does make people rely on the government.
yeah,
And in my view, that's not a good thing.
yeah, and he thought that actually takes the control away from people. It has people making excuses, and not living the best life they can live. So Carlos then, oh, first of all, my father, reason I was going with my father is, I often joke around. He was, you cannot find a non-German in my family, and the Germans are not the most, emotionally connected people. So my father was tough love, and he taught me a lot of things. But one thing he never taught me was directly was about money. Matter of fact, he believed that you don't talk about money within the family. He believed that you didn't talk about money with anybody. It's a private thing. And so I can remember at age 8, this becoming real poignant when I asked him about how much that car was that he brought home, and he chastised me. Don't you ever ask me how much something costs. Don't you ever ask me how much I owe. Don't you owe or make. Don't you ever ask anybody about those kind of things. And as a young kid, I'm like, well, how do you find out about these things? So I think I was on a mission the entire time to try to find out those kind of things. And so when I suspected what the boom and bust cycle was, because you're always seeing this. We went through a really bad recession in the end of the 70s, and interest rates spiked, and then Reagan came in and he manipulated the Federal Reserve, and they went down. President Trump, I like a lot of things that President Trump does, but right now I do not like how much pressure he's trying to put on the Federal Reserve, because I think interest rates should be free market, and we should just let them go, and however people bid on the bonds, that's the way it should be. Um, but that right there was what Bob Murphy taught me about the boom and bust cycle, and that's what the Austrians are always talking about. That when you manipulate and you bring interest rates down artificially, we have a lot of spending, but it causes a lot of malinvestments, investments that people normally would not do if they didn't have easy money. So that causes this boom cycle, and a lot of people, because they're doing investments that they wouldn't normally do if they had to use their own money, they they actually crash and they go out of business, and it causes a lot of recessionary problems and unemployment. So what does the Federal Reserve do? I'm sorry, as it's growing, they actually, to try to slow it down, they raise interest rates, which they recently did, but then everything crashes. And so they lower interest rates to try to get it back to where it's booming again. So it then booms it for a while, and then it busts for a while. And so there's this consternation throughout a society. And that consternation then also causes, and I don't think people realize this, but this is what Nelson taught me, is those bust cycles actually cause so much pain and turmoil in a family that they turn to anything to survive. And now all of a sudden the government's there with handouts to say, hey, we're going to help you. And so it causes more and more people to see the government as a place to turn to instead of then figuring it out for themselves. And that's where our society has gone in this situation.
Yeah, it erodes the autonomy of people, and Nelson talks about that a lot by referencing, the tribes of Israel and Egypt and Babylon and that kind of slavery. It's a financial manipulation towards the erosion of autonomy. Let me ask a question real quick, because it seems like I interrupted you. I'm sorry. You mentioned Austrians in part of what you were saying. So, had you already had Austrian economics on your radar, say prior to Think Tank? Okay, so that kind of put it on your radar?
Not until the Night of Clarity.
Okay. Neat.
And then we continued to go to the Night of Clarities for several years. And I actually had dinner with Ron Paul one evening. And so more and more of that, when you grow up thinking that these processes, these governmental processes, I didn't even know that the Federal Reserve was not federal. It's actually owned by the commercial banks. And you can see that you're manipulated all the time. Nelson used to talk about being manipulated and you didn't even know it. And the greatest example he talked about that was, in 1973, they put the IRA into a bill and said, this is the greatest thing for your future. We're gonna defer taxes for you until you retire, and then you can take the money out and then only pay taxes then. And then in 1999, they put the Roth IRA in. And the Roth IRA says, oh, here's the greatest thing for you. You can pay taxes now and you can let your money grow, and then you don't have to pay taxes when you take it out. And Nelson says, which is it? If they both say it's correct, don't you feel a little manipulated? That was his favorite saying about that. Don't you feel a little manipulated? But most people don't think this deeply about it. Austrians in the base belief of Austrians, unlike most other economic philosophies, is they look at how just basic concepts of human emotion, human behavior happens in a real society, not ones that are calculated with mathematical calculations. And I'm attracted to that. I am really good at simple math. I can do it in my head. My father taught me that a long time ago. I can see those types of equations very easily. When it comes to complex math, I can't do it. So I never really, looked at that part of economics. But when you have what they call thinking exercises, much like Einstein did. Einstein was a brilliant mathematician too, but he would look at things, and I was a science guy, so I really studied Einstein. Einstein would just look at things from actual reality when it came to his laws, and Sir Isaac Newton's, looking at Sir Isaac Newton's 3 laws of motion. And he would look at these thought experiments and he would solve it like that and then go to the math, where a lot of physicists just solve it with the mathematical formulas and not even sure if it works like that in all reality. Austrians do the same thing. And Bob Murphy opened that up to my eyes. And so those 3 men have actually helped me with my understanding of economics, that when I share and I listen to people all the time at a dinner party or a dinner, my wife's always kicking me under the table because she knows when somebody brings up a topic. And Jesse, I think you know my personality pretty well. I'm not confrontational, but I do believe what I believe. I'm not going to make a person look poorly. I'm not going to yell at them. I'm not going to demean them, but I'm going to stand up for what I believe. And so recently we were at when I say recently, it was probably 18 months ago, we were at a dinner party with a round table with 4 or 5 couples. And one of the guys says, yeah, all this inflation, it's just terrible about all the corporate greed. And sure enough, my left shin is like, bang.
She tried to preemptively get to you.
Yeah. And I let it go. And finally, I just said, Bob, we're having a really nice time tonight. Let's just drop that subject so you and I don't have to debate over the table. And he couldn't let it go. And I said, you know, you're absolutely right. And I hope your listeners understand this. I'm not saying there's not corporate greed. Okay. And I'm not saying that doesn't contribute to some of the price increases. However, corporate greed cannot be sustained without additional money in the supply. It's impossible because eventually you run out of the money. So what do they have to do to the prices? They must come down or they can't sell their particular goods or service. It's really that simple. And yet people cannot grasp that concept. So what I say to people all the time, yes, corporations, businesses, you and me, our next door neighbor, hey, you want to buy my used lawnmower? Corporations, the people selling, they suggest the price, but the consumer sets the price. And if people could get that simple concept through their heads, they would start to understand how the economy works. So let's go back to a corporation, and they're selling, let's say GM selling a car. They're going to push that as high as possible because they have to. They are fiduciary to their stockholders. But they can't just put it as high as they want because there comes a time when a person says, I'm not buying it. So then they lower the price. Then they lower the price. Then they lower the price. Oh, we've lowered it too much. They're flying off the shelves. So what do? They raise the price. They raise the price. Oh, this is the perfect balance of supply and demand right now. And if they push the price higher, because now what's the government done? They've lowered interest rates. They've put more money into the supply. So now they say, oh, I pushed the price higher. Oh, guess what? People are still buying it. I'm going to push it higher. People are still buying it. Pushing it higher. People are still buying it. Now the government says, oh, wait a minute. Prices are going way too high. We have inflation. So what do we get? What are we got to do to stop this? We're going to raise the interest rates. So now people don't have as easy of money. They're sucking money out of the system. So now what does GM do? Oh, people aren't buying our cars. Interest rates are too high. We got to lower it. We got to lower it. They lower it to a price. And now all of a sudden they're flying off the shelf again. That's the boom and bust cycle. Just using General Motors as an example. Well, it causes all this consternation within our society. GM has to lay off workers. Okay. So now these layoff workers, they don't have as much money to spend in our society. So now other businesses don't have as much money flowing into their business. What do they have to do? They have to lay off workers. So all the prices then start to come down because these laid off workers can't put more of their own money back into it. So Bob said if we could get to a place where we're not increasing the money supply, the Austrian idea, that we just let the society decide, free market decide, instead of doing this, we would do this. And there'd be a lot less stress. This was a revelation, Jesse, into my thinking, and it made perfect sense to me because as a science person, I taught this concept in a different way in ecology. It's called the climax community. Maybe some of your listeners will get this concept by this. So I know you're in the Carolinas, got some beautiful land there. So let's just take a 10-acre plot of land. Got some woods on it, got some creek running through it. We got a meadow, and all of a sudden we have some rabbits that actually come into the meadow. It's beautiful. Got all the food they want. They got some shelter, and they start to do what rabbits do. They explode. That's like the boom cycle. Then all of a sudden, predators are like, Hey, there's a lot, there's a lot of rabbits over there. Coyotes come in. They actually start eating the rabbits. They start having more and more babies because now they have a good food supply. They have babies and more coyotes now per this 10 acre. Now they start eating a lot of these rabbits. And guess what happens to the rabbit population? It goes down. The coyotes now don't have as much to eat. So guess what they do? They leave the area. So the population starts going up and down, up and down. The grasses that the rabbits are eating start to be minimalized. So this is just like the boom and bust cycle. What does nature do, though? Is nature says we're going to smooth this out because only enough coyotes will come in to eat these rabbits as far as the supply is. It's not being manipulated. But what if somebody came to that 10 acres and just dumped in 1,000 more rabbits? What would happen? You'd have an explosion of coyotes. That's exactly what happens in the money supply. I know that comparison is probably it's never going to be made at the Federal Reserve Board annual meeting, but this is what's happening when we pump money into the system. It's just like putting more rabbits into a 10-acre area, and you're going to have predators coming in to that situation.
Well, you're making me think of all kinds of things. I love how you're explaining that. Yeah, it's when it becomes a triangle, and instead of the supply demand society and folks that are providing services and goods, instead of just those two, when you have that triangle of the governmental intervention and the inflated money supply, then you're getting your rabbit and your coyote scenario. I like to give Dave Ramsey credit when I can, right?
Sure. I think Dave's done a lot of great things for society.
Lots. And one thing where I certainly can, even though he's wrong on some whole life stuff. That's me saying it.
Yeah, he's wrong on a lot of things.
He's wrong on a lot of things. He talks about a scenario of, well, imagine when you're getting ready to make a financial decision, imagine the money is on your kitchen table. And if you could detach enough to ask, so going back to what you had said earlier about when people, if they actually had to use their money on whatever investment they're considering, if that money were on the kitchen table, would you actually take that money and go do X, Y, or Z? Because it's easy to play with bank money and then get caught. And, you know, Nelson's story is in the book, right? Dave Ramsey's story. He's put his story out there about what it's like to get caught in a bad situation that's out of your control because you're not controlling the banking function in your life. But I love Dave Ramsey for what he does in getting people to think about, you know, their human behavior and their choices and stuff. So that I heard that years ago, and that's always stuck with me. And then also, for the record, when you were talking about your house and what it was like to buy a house, let's say it, you know, the 80s or whatever it was, and then, you know, in a different state or sometimes later. So I took that 75,000 that you were talking about earlier, and you'll appreciate this. I multiplied it by 5 because, you know, Nelson talks about in the book, well, just give it enough time, right? And this boom bust and all this stuff that's going on that we're talking about, and multiply it by 5. And, you know, is it pretty normal for a $375,000, you know, home price nowadays? Yeah, it is. How interesting. You know, just how interesting that I could take a real number that you gave me, multiply it by 5, and Nelson's proved right again on what he was trying to illustrate by that.
Absolutely. So I'm in St. Louis, and it has one of the lowest costs of living. I love living in St. Louis. It has one of the lowest costs of living in the United States, and you could Google it. It's absolutely true. And I just saw not too long ago where they said you could buy the average house in St. Louis for less than $400,000. So it's right on it.
Isn't that wild? Well, tell me then anything that's more recent, because you had used whole life insurance just because your dad started a policy at a young age. And that's so cool. That's so cool. You know, nowadays, people are, again, intentionally starting whole life insurance policies on children like myself. We've got our 4th child on the way. I can't wait to get that, you know, that whole life policy when baby boy gets here in November, is the goal that we're pressing towards. but in a different way. So people in prior generations did buy whole life insurance, used whole life insurance. So we know the historical, Disney's and J.C. Penney's and those other examples. Nelson codified it. Nelson added scale to how to own and use that policy for the banking function intentionally, with that being a starting point. So I guess what I'd like to ask you now is what's top of your mind? You personally have implemented the concept for years, personally knew Nelson. You help people every day all around the country with the concept. What's top of your mind? What's your pulse on the infinite banking concept, the NNI, Nelson's legacy, just any of it?
Well, I think there's a real bad. It's exciting right now, but I'm also an investment advisor, and there are, um, and once again, I have to be careful here because I can't talk about some of these things without it being scrubbed on the internet, because investment advisors have different regulations from the SEC, government intervention. So if it looks like I'm picking my words, it's because I am.
That's okay. I'll make sure to get your contact information before we're done for anybody that wants to reach out to you, because yes, you help folks with infinite banking. You're an investment advisor. You do lots of things, and you've shared some of the things that you personally do. So I'll make sure to do that. But yeah, by all means, say it how you want to say it.
Well, the reason, well, I can't do that because what the SEC actually does is they have people that actually do keywords now, um, in the social media, and they will tag you, for saying things that you haven't got approved before you said them. I've actually gotten dinged on this once before, and it was kind of weird. It was actually I was actually asked to speak another mastermind, and it wasn't recorded. And if it's not recorded, that's fine. It's just like me talking to you, in a coffee shop. But they don't like it when it's out there in perpetuity. And somebody was actually recording me on their phone, and then they put it up on their website what I said, and they caught me. And luckily, I didn't get fined. I just got a letter said, what are you doing? Basically, if you do this again, we will do X, Y, and Z. So I think this is all right for me to say. This is not, if you don't mind, Jesse, I'm going to say the disclosure here. This is not advice. Okay. I'd have to actually know your situation, but I think the new thing that, even in the IBC world, using whole life, is this whole idea of cryptocurrency. And Bob Murphy actually left the NNI board because he believes that cryptocurrency may be the salvation of society, because you cannot manipulate the money supply with cryptocurrency. And so that is actually causing a lot of corporations to panic, and frankly, some of our governments to panic too, because now they can't increase the money supply. Commercial banks are really panicking on this situation right now because they're not going to corner the market. Now, the government's using different scare tactics to say, well, if we can't trace this, then terrorists can use this. And there are some concerns on all these things, but I think we'll work this out, um, going forward. But what Nelson was trying to do, and Bob Murphy and Carlos was trying to get people to save first, a la Dave Ramsey, okay, and then not be able to multiply their savings, because all you could borrow in the against your cash value is what you save first, okay. So that doesn't increase the money supply. So Bitcoin would be the greatest, the most common cryptocurrency, but that would be there's a limited supply of Bitcoin, and so that's why Bob left the NNI membership to actually explore this with another company going forward. That's the that's the new thing. that I think the industry is going to have to deal with. Insurance companies are going to have to deal with this. Mass Mutual actually bought $200 million of Bitcoin several years ago. People thought, oh my goodness, but Mass Mutual has $560 billion of assets. 200 million sounds like a lot of money, but relative to $560 billion, it's not. Do the math. It's a drop in the bucket. And I know that sounds crazy, Jesse, because we throw around these. Oh, by the way, Jesse, also today was the first time our national debt went over $37 trillion. We throw around trillion like it's a couple $100,000. I joke around with my clients sometimes. I didn't even know there was a number of $100,000 growing up in the 70s. I didn't even know numbers went that high. And now,
Well, you weren't allowed to ask questions, and our government doesn't want us to ask questions either about where the debt's at and how the money's being used.
yeah, so I think that's where I think we are innovating so quickly. I think that's a good thing. I'm all for innovation in a variety of things. I used to talk about this with my science classes. Men in some form has been around as a humanoid on this planet for about 60 million years. But from 60 million, um, we just walked around. And then we finally domesticated animals and we rode animals, but that took tens of millions of years to do that. Then the steam engine, well, I guess the next thing we did was boats, and those probably came around, millions of years ago. But right, it wasn't until steam engines came in the middle 1800s that we went like this from locomoting around the earth to middle 1800s to the late 1900s cars to the early 1900s or I'm sorry, late 1800s cars, early 1900s plane, just a couple decades later to jet planes, and then just a couple decades later to the moon. And so our trajectory of being able to move around went like this. And guess what? It's just like cash value. It takes a while, but if you can actually build your own bank, there's going to be a time where your cash value is going to take off and you've built it without manipulating the money supply. And now you have all this capital to go do what you do on a normal day, and you're not increasing the money supply. And a lot of people say, well, I really don't care about that. I really only care about myself. That's impossible on this planet. We're all interconnected. We have to care about other people and how other things are done. I made this comment, if being a lone ranger is the best thing, then solitary confinement would not be a punishment. You know, being collaborative, doing things in a teamwork in society is the best thing that can happen to a society and frankly, you and your business.
Right. Okay. Well, you brought up a big subject there on the mode of transportation that you and I'll have to pick up. Yeah, I can leave it at that. That'd be a good conversation. But it's also my way to invite you. Let me go ahead and do this now. I really appreciate you giving your story. I really appreciate you giving your insights. I really appreciate being able to have a conversation with you at all. It's still recent enough, new enough to me to say that with a lot of fervor. I'd love to invite you to future conversations. You and I were talking a little bit before about other projects that I have going on, other series that I have going on the channel to educate myself, to educate my clients, to educate prospective clients about other areas where they can improve their financial, standing. Love to have you join me at a round table. So open invite. I'd love to have you sit down at a round table conversation. I'll connect, calendar wise so that we can make that happen if you'd be open to that. If you can, would you let people know where they can find you best?
If you're looking to connect with me, the easiest way to do that is at my initial, my first name, Wehner, Wehner, at e3wealth.com. That's the absolutely easiest way. And if you have questions, Jesse's really, really good at the whole life insurance strategies. But if you have questions about your estate plan, if you have questions about, tax minimization, Nelson wasn't really big on the stock market because he thinks that's manipulated too. We had conversations about this, and I always say, Nelson, I want to meet people where they are and help them learn about the manipulation. And I tell Nelson, it's hard for me to tell some person that made $3 million in the stock market they were wrong. And he said, Bruce, they weren't right either. They were lucky.
That's funny.
Yeah. But we can discuss all those different aspects. E3 Wealth has been around for about 25 years. And we have many, many practitioners in our firm. But what we try to do is help people in an education. E3 stands for to educate, empower, and enlighten. That's what the 3 E's stand for. And so anybody that needs, we have either in-house people that do these things, or we have vetted out relationships that we can help people across the country in all these different aspects of your financial life. Because taking the banking function into your life is great, but you also have trust, you have Medicare supplements, you have legal documents that you have to do. If you want to look at different alternative investments, there's all kinds of different things that you can look at to help your family get through these. Now, the last thing I'd like to end on, Jess, is there's nothing more important than personal responsibility. And if a person thinks that they can't save money, they're correct because of their mindset. That's the bottom line. They've got to figure out a way to either increase their money supply or to decrease the money that's going out to save, to be able to save. It's always an excuse. And I know marketing and the government is always been trying to manipulate your mindset, but you're not going to change your way until you open up your mind that you are being manipulated, and you're going to decide not to be manipulated.
I love it. All right, let me run through some of these rapid fire questions real quick. Do you have a favorite hobby?
Yeah, I play a lot of golf.
Love it. Do you have a favorite quote or saying?
Yes. I have so many of them. I'm trying to pick the one that, I guess George Carlin. I was trying to pick. This is probably my favorite one, but I didn't want to seem too negative. But George Carlin says, "Just think of how stupid the average person is, and half the people are stupider than they are." And and I guess a good way of saying that is, instead of saying stupid, is to say ignorant, because even though our society think ignorant is actually a demeaning word, it's not. If you understand what ignorant means, it means you have not been exposed or educated to that topic. So in finances, just think of how ignorant the average person is on finances, and half the people in the world are more ignorant than they are. And it's because they haven't been exposed or they haven't educated themselves on the concepts.
All right. I'm just trying to move fast for you.
You're good.
I got two more for you. What characteristic do you value most in a person?
Oh, authenticity.
I love that. All right, and then the last question. Would you rather be able to breathe underwater or fly?
One of my greatest fears is drowning, so I guess I would pick. I guess I'd pick being able to breathe underwater.
There you go. Very cool. Well, I tried to throw those at you really quick. I'll put your contact information in the show notes below. I really appreciated the conversation. Look forward to more. Appreciate you for everything you've done for me. Any final thoughts? Anything?
Oh, just tell me when we're going to do this again.
I will tell you when we're going to do it again then. Thank you, sir. I know you got to make your next meeting. Appreciate you.
All right. Take care.
Awesome. You have a good one. Well, that was an absolute pleasure for me to have Bruce Wehner on the channel to discuss his IBC journey with me and share his insights. His contact information will be below in the show notes. You can always find me at durhamtalents.com. My hope is that you do live and leave a lasting legacy. Have a great day. Take care.